Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is my friend Ilana Saul. We both had C-sections with our first children.
Yes.
But this time around for my second one, I'm gonna have an elective C-section and you had a successful VBAC.
Yes.
Yeah, which stands for vaginal birth after cesarean. So we're gonna talk about our decisions to have an elective and to have a VBAC and kind of the pros and cons of it. I was kind of terrified about labor in the first place. Like vaginal labor sounded so scary to me. The anxiety of not knowing what I was in for really got to me, but I still went through it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna try this because we're supposed to be able to do this and everything. And then sure enough, like 5 hours into going into labor, I'm in the hospital and they're like, you probably need a C-section because we can't guarantee a safety. So I was like, all right, C-section, here we go. I guess I feel like for like the second time around, to me, it's just an easy decision to go elective C-section.
Yeah, you know what to expect also.
Yeah, it seems easier.
So I had a planned C-section the first time. So my daughter was breech. So we knew like going into it that I was gonna have a C-section. We tried to get her to turn and she wouldn't turn. I did go into labor like a month early. So my C-section wasn't even like when it was supposed to be scheduled, but it was going to be, it was planned. Like they told me just come to the hospital and you're gonna have a C-section when you go into labor.
So then what was it that made you decide that you wanted to go the VBAC route?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I was more terrified of surgery than of vaginal birth. So I had never been in an OR in my life before the C-section. Like I'd had my wisdom teeth out. That was like the closest I'd gotten, you know, I was never in an OR. And I was like really scared of surgery. And then the actual experience was still really scary for me, even though I had like talked to a bunch of friends and talked to my doctor and like tried to prepare myself mentally and knew what to expect. But it was still definitely a scary experience for me. So.
Got it. See, I felt like surgery was more straightforward. Granted, I'm one of those people, like if you watch a lot of the stuff that we work on, we do surgery videos and I'm like in the operating room with them and stuff. And for me, it just seemed really straightforward. But I can see how surgery would be scary because surgery is scary.
Yeah. I also like had a couple of experiences as a new mom that kind of led me to want to try to go the VBAC route.
Oh, what was that?
Yeah, I had postpartum anxiety. That was one thing. I had pretty bad postpartum anxiety with my first. And we also had like a lot of trouble at the beginning learning to breastfeed. And obviously like I'll never know why that happened, but statistically you're a little more likely to have both of those things happen if you had a C-section versus vaginal. So I was like, you know, the surgery was like scary for me and next time I'd rather have like a better chance of not having as bad of postpartum anxiety and like maybe an easier time breastfeeding the second time around. So kind of did a lot of research. I hired a doula and talked to her and ended up deciding that that was the right decision for me.
Got it. I've heard that there can be sometimes some complications to a VBAC, and that's why your doctor will be like, no, you should just, you've already had the C-section, you should just stick with the C-section. You know, like a lot of people, you'll read stuff online and they're like, you know, the complications for an elective C-section are really high or complications for a VBAC are really high. But everything that I've read is that the complications are very low.
Yeah.
No matter what.
And they're like pretty equal for both.
Yeah.
They're pretty equal and very low and like don't stress.
Yeah.
Basically the risk that you hear associated with VBAC is uterine rupture, which sounds terrifying. When you hear it, you're like, my uterus gonna explode? But what it actually can mean is literally just like your scar is starting to separate a tiny bit, like like if you pulled like on the seams of a clothing. It doesn't mean you're gonna like come apart and explode, but it means it could start to separate. And the risk of that again is very low. But if it does start to happen, it's only serious if you're not at the hospital. Because if you're at the hospital, they're monitoring you. And if it starts to happen, the worst that happens, they're just like, okay, you actually do have to have a C-section. We're going to go back in there.
Right.
But if you're like in the hospital and they're like making sure you're saving the baby
then
safe.
You're good.
Then
Then
you're good.
And I guess like the worst case scenario if you're in a hospital is you have a C-section.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's like probably best to like find the right doctor, right gynecologist.
Yeah.
Because some will probably be bigger, I guess like cheerleaders of VBACs versus, you know, so you might have other doctors that are like, no, why don't you just do the elective C-section? So I think it's also about finding that.
Yeah, I think choice is the most important thing. I think it's really important for just like as women to find a doctor who's going to give you a choice and like let you make an informed decision. Obviously like a safe choice, but you know, I think that was what was important for me.
Yeah. I know that I talked to my doctor about it and I was like, you know, if there's a reason you think I should do a VBAC, let's talk about it. You know, because obviously I'll take your opinion into account for this if you know if there's a reason to. And he was kind of like, I mean, you're good. Yeah. He's like, it's really up to you. He said that, you know, like you have to be a good candidate for it. They look at things like why you had a C-section in the first place. So you're obviously a great candidate because your baby was just breech. If your second baby's not breech, you know.
Yeah. If you have a breech baby, that's like kind of when you're the best candidate for a VBAC. Because if there was some reason the first time that you needed to have a C-section that like might happen again, then they'll tell you like you may not be able to have a successful VBAC. you have less of a chance. But when your baby's breech and the second time he like turned and was fine and was in the right position, I had like a really good chance going into it.
That makes sense. So I didn't have a breech baby, but I had some placenta issues.
Yeah.
And we're not even really sure exactly what happened. Like they were guessing that maybe the cord was wrapped around his neck, but then the cord wasn't wrapped around his neck. And then they even kept my placenta to do studies on it and stuff because they wanted to know what happened. And to this day, we really don't know exactly what caused my emergency C-section. So that makes me a sort of complicated.
Yeah, it could happen. They don't know if it's going to happen again.
Exactly. And then that ends up leading to another C-section if you're complicated. So he kind of explained that stuff to me. And I, just that feeling of, I remember that emergency C-section feeling. And I feel like whenever people talk about their C-sections and they had a bad experience, it's because it was an emergency.
Yes, I totally agree. I had, my first C-section was actually probably an easier recovery than what a lot of people have.
Yeah.
Because it was non-emergency. I wasn't laboring for 20 hours first. I was kind of like in good shape, like as well rested as you can be when you're pregnant, going into it. And I've had friends I've talked to who like labored, for hours beforehand, and then they had really hard recovery when it came down to it.
That makes sense. I think the other thing for me was I was kind of like, and my doctor and I joked, it was like, I already have one hole that the baby came out of. So instead of ruining another hole, let's go with that hole.
No, it's kind of true. Yeah. I'm like, no, I have like both kind of,
So that was one of the decisions that I made as well. And also because it was an emergency C-section, it's not a terrible scar, but it's one of those that can be like improved on because it was emergency. They were going fast.
Right.
This time it'll be elective. Yeah. He's like, I'll go in there. I'm like, make it look real good, that kind of thing. So it's like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
I think those are like my main reasons for an elective C-section. It's not even a lot of thought that I've put into it. I also just was never really like the big fan of trying to go vaginal, So for me, that was, that's kind of the deciding factor.
No, that makes sense. I think for me, because like the operating room experience was kind of scary, and then like the whole like labor and vaginal delivery was actually very zen for me. Yeah. Like obviously it's not fun no matter how you give birth. It's not like, oh, this is going to be a really fun experience. I can't wait. At least the entire time that I was like laboring up until the last couple hours, like I did feel really zen. Like I was just there with like my husband and my doula, and we were just talking, and like it was like a nice big hospital room, and I didn't really feel like anxious about it up until like the very end. Then it gets intense, but most of the time I was like, oh, okay, like
really cool.
Yeah, I'm like just excited this is going to happen, and I'm like getting through this,
Got it. Do you mind telling us about the experience, like your whole birth experience?
Yeah. So I went into labor at 38 weeks, which my older daughter with the C-section, she came at 36, so she was pretty early.
Interesting. Is that something like your mom or maybe like your mother-in-law?
No, I don't think so. Yeah,
so
I don't think like
you.
anyone else. Yeah, just me. They kind of knew I was going to go into labor early too, because I was getting like a lot of like Braxton Hicks really early on, and my doctor kind of warned me like you might go into labor a little early. I was on progesterone with my second to try and keep him in a little longer. So he stayed in there till 38 weeks.
Got it. Okay.
And I started having contractions really early in the morning, like 4 a.m. And whereas with the first time with my daughter with the C-section, with her, my water broke at like 2 a.m. and they tell you just come straight to the hospital.
Right, if your water breaks.
Yeah, if your water breaks, because you're going to just go into surgery. With this time, I did kind of like, I was able to labor at home for a few hours. I think I was at home until like noon.
Oh, wow.
Which was kind of, that was kind of nice too.
So from 4 a.m. to noon. Okay.
Yeah, because it was, again, like if you are someone who is like anxious in a hospital setting and you'd rather be at home a little longer, like that was nice for me that I didn't just have to rush into a hospital. I was like, kind of just at home. We didn't have to rush, like especially with an older kid, we were able to call my mother-in-law, and she lives like
God, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, like
that's
a little
actually one
away.
of the things for me too, is that with our first one, I can already like plan who's going to stay with him and everything
that is
too.
Nice. That is nice. I went to the hospital around noon, and whereas with like if you're just having normal like low risk vaginal delivery, they'll have you wait even longer to come into the hospital usually. But with the VBAC, they will tell you like come in when your contractions are like, still a little further apart, because they want to monitor you basically.
Got it.
Because the dangers of like having a VBAC, which there are some risks associated with them, are only if you're not being monitored. Like if you were at home giving birth,
right?
Like, there are things that
they
can
say that like for a VBAC, they don't recommend doing like the water birth and all that kind of stuff. Like you have to be in a hospital.
They want to make sure that like the baby's safe and that you're safe and everything. So they do have you come in a little earlier than you would otherwise. And then I came in and just hung out for a little while. I ended up having, it really wasn't that bad. It was like kind of mellow. That was like a nice thing. Like I think I just wasn't nervous. I was just like, okay, I can do this. I had a walking epidural after, I think when I, like around 4 p.m. when I was in labor for like 12 hours. So after that, especially like my pain management was really good and I wasn't in pain anymore. So I was like, I was pretty zen about it. I was like, I don't feel anything. Cool. Like I feel, I'm in a good place. my labor like started progressing, and I started pushing like around 9 or 10 p.m.
But it sounds like it was a pretty normal, like almost like a first time experience.
Yeah, it was. There was no like emergency. Nothing went wrong. Like I mean, I was really lucky in that respect, because obviously there's a million things that you can't predict ever, but like everything, and I try and not have a strict plan and be like, whatever happens, happens. But everything did kind of go according to plan.
That's
like,
awesome.
Yeah,
And did you feel like the recovery was faster?
it was. You know, birth and recovery is not fun, but it's definitely quicker with vaginal delivery versus C-section.
Right, because you didn't have to stay in the hospital as long.
I only had to stay in the hospital like less than 2 days, I think,
Okay.
total, which was also important to me having an older child. It was like, it's nice to be back at home with her sooner. The recovery, like, I mean, I would say like 2 weeks later, I was like feeling pretty good. Whereas
Oh,
with the
that's
C-section,
good.
sometimes it's 3 or 4 weeks until you're like really
Right.
up and mobile. To
Right.
really
Are you allowed to go back to like working out and all that stuff pretty quickly too?
Yeah, I mean, I think they still recommend you wait like a few weeks, but compared to like a C-section, it's quicker.
So those are really good points, because I think definitely like if you want to be out of the hospital quicker, I'm one of those people, I'm like, I'll hang out here.
Yeah.
I will bring me food.
Yeah.
I'll be friends with the nurses,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But my husband definitely hates being
Yeah.
in the hospital. Obviously, it's not as comfortable for them
Yeah.
either. But I can say like if you don't
Yeah.
want to be in the hospital as long, you want to be able to like recover quicker, you've got the first child already,
Yeah.
and you're a good candidate, it sounds like a VBAC is
Yeah.
kind of the way to go.
Yeah, it is funny though, because the first time I actually like didn't mind being in the hospital for 4 days for the reason, like you said, you're like, oh, you're gonna help me with the baby for 4
like,
days.
oh, you're gonna
I'm
teach me how to
scared about going
breastfeed.
home.
Yeah, exactly.
But the second time, like, it was more just about being able to get home to my daughter sooner. I think I like wanted to help, you know, make the transition easier on her, because becoming like a big sister, big brother is a big deal too. So I think it was nice for me knowing the second time that I would be back a little earlier. But
Yeah.
but it is nice to have like the nurses help and everything.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Did you feel like the stuff like your anxiety, postpartum anxiety, was a little bit better the second time
Yes,
around?
it was. So everything was way better. I had like a much easier time breastfeeding. My postpartum anxiety was like way less than the first time. But again, you never know why. Like
Right,
there are
'cause
so
you
many
might
factors.
just be an experienced mom
yeah,
now, and
there are like so many
Right.
factors that could have gone into it. But it was just nice that I did have a better experience the second time around.
yeah, that's good. That's good. And you know, I feel like I do have friends that maybe had like emergency C-sections, or they had planned ones because their baby was breech or something like that. And I know like a lot of my friends have told me they felt like they were less of a woman, or they didn't like experience what it is to like go through motherhood because they didn't do a vaginal birth.
I mean, I hate that people feel that way. I hope
do
like
too.
women don't feel that way. First of all, you grew a human. It doesn't matter how they come out.
Vaginas, penises,
Yeah.
you're growing
No,
them.
it's like pretty amazing. And even
Yeah.
like mothers who don't grow their own babies, like that's really amazing too. And
Exactly,
it's hard
yeah.
work. But I do think there's something to be said for like the rush of feel good hormones you get when you deliver vaginally.
Oh, I
Like
hadn't thought about
I
that.
didn't try and get into my head about it, about like, oh, I'm not a woman, or I didn't do it like a certain way, because like it's you know, you're
Yeah.
still a mother, and like that's all that matters. But when I did deliver vaginally, I felt like amazing and triumphant afterwards. I'm like, oh my god, I did this, and I like was like, you feel like you're on a natural high.
Interesting.
Whereas like after the first time, I was still like kind of like scared and just like, okay, you're handing me this baby, and what just happened? So
Yeah.
I think just like probably hormonally there was like a difference in how I was feeling.
That makes sense. One of my girlfriends said that giving birth was profound. Like that was her word for it.
Yeah, it almost is. I mean, it sounds crazy because it's also like not a pleasant experience at all. But like after I did it, I was like, you know, I just felt that kind of natural high. Whereas like the first time I felt scared, like
Yep.
even right after, even when my like daughter was born, I still was like still kind of in that state of being a little scared and like what just happened.
Yeah, I definitely felt that way. I mean, I definitely wouldn't tell anybody that a C-section is awesome
Yeah.
and fun, because I remember I was one of those people, because I'd already had an epidural and they'd given me Pitocin, and then they gave me something to like counteract the Pitocin, because
Yeah.
then we were having complications and they weren't sure if it was
Yeah.
the Pitocin, and then it just turned into a big mess like that. And so then by the time I ended up in the operating room, they had to give me anesthesia.
Yeah.
So I was like out of it,
Yeah,
just completely
yeah.
out of it. And I remember I was shaking a lot and stuff. And even one of my friends just had a baby, and she said that she started shaking even though she
Yeah.
had an elective C-section.
Part of it is like the drugs they give you.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just nerves. I think it's like they give you
Like you
something
get
with
like
drugs
this
that make you
weird
shaky.
like shakiness
Yeah.
and stuff. And I remember hating that feeling.
Yeah.
And then also they were like, as they started to wheel me out into the recovery room, they're like, we're going to put the baby on your chest.
Yeah.
And I felt like I couldn't move.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not ready. And they were just like, plop, baby,
Yeah.
right here. I remember they just like threw my arms over the baby
Yeah.
like this. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, I also like, I was by no means someone who was like, I'm gonna do this all naturally. I like don't want an epidural. I was like, I'm gonna get an epidural if I like feel
Need
like
it.
I need it. At the hospital I delivered at Cedars-Sinai, they offer something called a walking epidural, which I know not like every hospital necessarily does, but it was really great because I had like the pain management, but I could still still get up. I was
Got
still
it.
mobile. So, because with the C-section, like the feeling of like being totally numb
Yeah.
from the waist down,
Yeah,
paralyzed was also scary
there was like,
for me.
I couldn't move my toes. They
Yeah,
kept coming
and
by
it's
and
a weird
asking
feeling.
me.
And if you've never
Yeah.
even had surgery before, you're like, what is happening? Whereas the second time around, like up until the very last minute, I could get up out of bed. I could like go to the bathroom on my own. I never had to have a catheter, and it was all
That's
like
nice.
a better
Though I will
experience.
say I did really enjoy the catheter. when they asked me to get up to go use the
Yeah.
restroom and stuff,
Yeah.
at first I couldn't do it. I think I was having a little bit of stage fright because the
Yeah.
nurse, kind of hangs
Yeah.
out with you, and you're like, I can't really pee while
Yeah.
you're in the bathroom
Yeah.
with me. And she was like, if you don't end up using the restroom, then we're gonna have to put the catheter back. And I was like, but I really enjoyed the catheter. I didn't have to get up or
Yeah.
anything. And she's like, it won't feel good this
Yeah.
time if we put it back. I was like, okay, good point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing the
Thank you.
experience
Yeah.
and for being here and for being part of the fam group. You guys can join. I'll put a link below in the description box so that you can find us on Facebook. You can ask any questions. If you join the group, I'm sure you can ask Ilana some questions
Yes,
too because
yeah.
she's in there.
I'd be happy to answer any.
Yeah, and same with me for elective C-section. I haven't gone through it yet, but I've been through my first C-section, so I know a little bit about it. And then, you guys can share your experiences too because we always want to know what you've done if you did a VBAC, if you did elective C-section. Was it positive? Was it negative? We want to know all that stuff, so share that in the comments, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.